But tonight we're going to talk about Team Rubicon's operation planning process. It's how we make the decision whether we respond to a disaster and how we respond to that disaster. And it's a bunch of acronyms: ISR, Recon, Warno, ADVON, OPORD, AAR, and I'm adding the YOU. So hopefully, as I go through all this stuff, you'll be able to connect how you, as a gray shirt, whether you're participating in the process anywhere in the process, or you're a gray shirt hoping to deploy on a local or territory operation or national operation, you'll know where you fit in to all of those pieces. So what is the op planning process? It's two main chunks. One is leading up to the formal planning and preparation. We're doing detection and monitoring. Then comes the planning and preparation phase, which is a series of steps: ISR, Recon, Warno, ADVON, OPORD. We're going to go through all of those. And when we go through all of those, I'm going to give you just a 30,000-foot view. There's online training in this area, so you can really take a deeper dive in it if you're interested. I hope you are interested, because it gives you really good insight into how we do what we do and why we do what we do. Then the next chunk is what happens afterwards. Now, demob is not really a part of the planning process, but then again, it really is. And I'll talk about why we throw that into the presentation here. And then there's the after action report. The job isn't done until the paperwork is complete. So let me jump into take a detour first before I jump into the planning process. For me, everything Team Rubicon is doing now revolves around our local gray shirts and our local resilient city strategy. You've probably heard me at least one other presentation, maybe two or three other presentations, where we talk about how disasters start and end locally. That when Team Rubicon and FEMA and the Red Cross all go home, the community is still there. And that community crippling disasters are on the rise, and not all of them are getting the attention they deserve. So Team Rubicon continues to remain vital and important in our local communities. Our challenge, and the reason we have an op planning process that is so fixed in its process but flexible in the types of results it can produce, is so that we can shorten the time between the disaster and our response, especially for a local response. We'd love to be able to become aware of a disaster on a Tuesday and have gray shirts deployed on Wednesday. But realistically, it may take us a few days, it may take us a week or so, but we're working making every effort to have that time be as short as possible. And I'll talk a little bit about how that process is working right now. If we're decentralized, if we're localized, if we're depending upon gray shirts in the field, such as yourselves, as opposed to at central headquarters in Los Angeles or the National Operations Center in Dallas, we can achieve those goals of responding more quickly to disasters and executing them more appropriately for the communities. No questions? If there are no questions, I'll move on. So the first phase is detection and monitoring. One of the things that we do during blue skies, and blue skies is when there are no disasters coming up, nothing that the National Weather Service is telling us to be nervous about. We're building relationships. We're building relationships with local emergency managers, state emergency managers, other volunteer organizations, and we're building our capacity. And the main capacity that we're working to build right now are active, engaged gray shirts. which is why I'm grateful for your participation in tonight's session and everything that you're doing on an ongoing basis for Team Rubicon. As John Connors, who's the Deputy Director for the Northeast Territory, always says, local gray shirts are the tip of the spear. Now, when we start to see that there are gray shirts on the horizon, we do tracking. We've got all kinds of tools and satellite equipment and relationships at the National Operations Center, but we also count on folks to do local tracking. Certainly, if you wake up in the morning and a tornado has blown away the houses across the street from you, you are now important to our tracking and our information to responding to that disaster. We do our best to anticipate. So on the left, for example, these are things that popped up in one of the on a daily basis, actually, on the Northeast leadership chat. On the left-hand side, this was a week or two ago. I've totally lost track of time. It was Tropical Storm Zeta, which is the one that passed to the south of us. And although the winds picked up a little bit, there was no damage to any place in our territory. On the right-hand side, that was updated this morning. That is Tropical Storm Eta, Eta. Someone who took Greek, took Latin, may know better than I. Anyway, we look at this. This stuff gets published every morning. We can take a look at it. But all of us can be tracking the weather. All of us can be part of it. One of the things we've been doing, and it's new to, it started last hurricane season and has been amped up this hurricane season. When there's a prospect of a major disaster, we will pre-stage equipment and gray shirts. They may be embedded in a safe area in the storm zone, or they may be just outside of the storm zone waiting. In the case of Hurricane Laura, not only did we pre-stage folks to go out and do all those steps that we're going to talk about in a moment, but we also pre-staged heavy equipment operators. So we were able to, as soon as it was safe, spin up an operation for road clearance to assist the local responders and to make it easier for us to do assessments and for other volunteer groups to do assessments to help us move in as quickly as possible. So if we can pre-stage some stuff, we're doing that now also, and that's been pretty successful. I remember once, can't remember which hurricane, we did all this pre-staging, the hurricane went out to sea. We were very happy to have deployed all those assets and then send them home. So either way, it's a positive thing that we're doing. All right, the initial situation report. The initial situation report is basically, here's what happened. Here's the overview of the disaster, and here's the area that's been affected. Now, one of the things that the initial situation report does is it explains it in terms that folks who are not familiar with the geographic area are going to be able to understand the impact, because we may be calling people in from outside of the area to respond. So if we're saying there's a flooding situation in Burlington County, for example, we're going to have to provide as much detail as possible so somebody not familiar with the area is able to really understand what's happening there. So it's not just going to be the storm and how it affected the homeowners there, but it's going to be what's the structure of the emergency response there? What is the social vulnerability index analysis? And I'll talk about that in a minute. And we do recommend next steps, and we've got a green light, which is go to the next step. The next step being the Warno, doing the recon. Make sure I get that right. The next step after ISR is recon. We can hold off for a while and gather some more information to make a decision, or we could say, nope, the scope of the disaster was not really significant, and it's not appropriate for Team Rubicon to respond. Great example of that was back uh, earlier in the year when we had those windstorms that ripped through New Jersey, and we had, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people without power. But the scope of the disaster that struck was really something that was owned by the utilities. So we said, nope, we're not even going to do a recon because it doesn't look like we can respond. Same storm in Delaware, we realized this is affecting homeowners, and we went to the next stage in the process. Now, in theory, an ISR, an initial situation report, can be filed by any gray shirt. Realistically, because every gray shirt doesn't have access to the computer software and the forms, etc., local gray shirts can partner with their local leadership to get that ISR out. Okay? So you can work together with local leadership to be a part of that initial situation report team, and who knows your communities better than you. I'll move on. Oh, I wanted to just talk about that social vulnerability index because it raises a question that we hear frequently at Team Rubicon. How do we decide, in part, if that community has been affected in a way that they need our assistance? So if it's a wealthy community where the homeowners, for the most part, are able to buy insurance, and the community is not being put at a tremendous risk by the disaster, we may not respond, or we may respond to one neighborhood and not to another neighborhood. And we analyze socioeconomic factors, accessibility to transportation, the price of housing, whether there's lots of disabled folks in the community, what the ability of the community is to respond on their own, by the government, how it compares with other communities in the area, so that if it's a large disaster, we can prioritize if we need to, based on these factors. Are these factors all that we consider? No, but they certainly do come into play. And this helps us triage so we know where to put our resources, and we never will say no to a community because of its racial makeup or ethnic makeup or anything like that, certainly, but it's information that helps us determine the community need. Questions on that?
I remember hearing some people, there was some community where the SBI was not very high that we were going into and helping out on. And there was some grumbling, people didn't think that we should be in there because they didn't really need the help that much. But from what I understand, they ended up, donating quite a bit of money. So it allowed us to help, that many more people in, more severely SBI areas.
Yeah, a lot of the decisions that get made during the early process can certainly change based on what's happening on the ground. I can't really address what you're saying, but I won't, because I don't know that particular situation. But I do know that it's not unusual for us to tack in some of those ways. I'm not sure that the donation made a difference, but all of
It
that,
was.
I'll couch it. I'm not sure.
The donation was after the fact. I mean, it was not.
Gotcha.
I mean, we weren't going in there looking for a donation, but
Right.
people, apparently, some gray shirts were like, we shouldn't be in this neighborhood. They can afford, to bring in people, but they were still appreciative, of what, we went in, did what we normally do, and as a result of that, they ended up, donating after the fact.
Gotcha. So if the ISR determines that there's a disaster, there's a community that we could potentially serve, we then drill down a little deeper and send a reconnaissance team out. The reconnaissance team, depending upon the size of the disaster, might include some people from national, but always includes local folks. And there's a hint, again, online training for you to be qualified to do reconnaissance. Local knowledge is always very beneficial in this process. But in addition to putting all the background information, who were the local contacts, etc., there are three big questions that need to be answered. One is, did a disaster occur and what was its impact? Okay. What really happened on the ground? Second, are there unmet needs? And third, do those unmet needs fall into the capabilities of Team Rubicon? Again, during that windstorm, we were able to go 1, 2, 3, yes, in Delaware, but that third category where the unmet need was more commercial as opposed to homeowners when the powers went out in New Jersey, and there wasn't a concentrated community where we could deploy an operation and support an operation. We weren't 3 for 3, so we ended up not deploying in New Jersey for that storm. After recon, we moved to the warning order. Okay, the warning order first is the most fun thing we do. Is we name the operation and we try to be pretty creative and polite when we do that. But the warning order defines the operation in terms of how long it will take. How long is an operational period at Team Rubicon? Anybody know? Remember from their FEMA classes?
8 days for
No, an operational
no
period is
a day.
a day. Yes.
Day.
We write the incident action plan, rewrite it every day for the next day. Okay. We look at how many gray shirts we need for each operational period every day. What's the makeup of the C&G staffing? I've been on operations of approximately the same size that have had 5 people on the command and general staff and have had 2 people on the command and general staff. Lots of variables there. What are the resources, vehicles, trailers, tech kits, etc.? Excuse me, what gets launched with the warning order is the mission planning team. It's a group of folks, and it certainly includes planners at the territory, state, and local level, and metro level, but it also includes people from logistics, from planning, from finance, from mobilization, that now the baton is passed to a committee to really begin the mission planning process, okay, which is the steps that follows. One of the other things that happen is that we ramp up mobilization. And what happens during the mobilization phase of the Warno is we send out a call to gray shirts. These are kind of old, so they may not look exactly like this anymore, but it's pretty close. But basically, it's to check for availability. You're asked to register your availability. Okay, you're being asked to let folks know if you can show up, so we can say, hey, we're going to have enough. If we do this, we've got enough gray shirts to fit the bill. But this is just your registering. You wouldn't be asked to reconfirm until we get through the next stages. After the warning order, we do something called advanced echelon. Echelon is a fancy word for organizing things. And I am stealing from somebody else's presentation that the advanced echelon figures out the beds, burgers, and brooms. We figure out where we can put the fob. We figure out where we can put the billeting. We figure out how we're going to feed the gray shirts. We figure out where we're going to get supplies, where we're going to get, chainsaw fuel, where we're going to get fuel for the vehicles. So all of these factors are sorted out by the Advon team. Okay, and the Advon team is going to report this back to the mission planning team that was set up under the Warno. Okay, and if we can't find these resources, we may not go in, or we may have to scramble to make things happen. I think that our operations going on in the South right now are great examples of improvisation and adaptation, both because of the severity of the storms and our restrictions because of the pandemic. So after the Advon If the advon approves the next step is called the operations order. And you may have seen announcements like this on social media where we've gone through the ISR, the Warno, and the op ord, the op ord is issued. Okay, that means that we know we have enough gray shirts. We have to respond to a defined disaster, use it to do specific things, and that we've got the resources to feed, shelter, and supply those gray shirts. So at this point, once the op ord goes out, the gray shirts who registered have been vetted in the background by the mobilization team and start getting their dispatch instructions. The op ord, which is the next document, and think about all these steps as being, the Russian nesting dolls, the Matryoshka dolls, where one goes inside the next and inside the next. So you got the ISR in the middle, and then you keep building out until you get to the operation order. Okay. And so all of the things we learned, all of the things we figured out now contribute to the op ord, which are very specific. We're going to start on this day. We hope to finish on this day. Here are the logistical requirements. Here's the transportation requirements, etc. At this point, the mission planning team is done, and they hand the baton to the incident commander. The incident commander actually is obligated is contracted, if you will, although to Team Rubicon to fulfill the mission, to make sure that everything that's in the op ord is achieved to the best of the ability that Team Rubicon can do that. The incident commander no longer doesn't report to the mission planning team and doesn't report to local leadership anymore. Local leadership is not involved in a gray skies operation, but the incident commander is now reporting to the incident management team based at the NOC. And there's usually one person that the IC responds to that is taking responsibility for that particular operation. On something big, like we have in the South right now, there are likely to be incident management team folks on the ground and perhaps multiple incident commanders, but we're looking more at the local stuff. An incident commander reporting to someone on the IMT. Okay, mission planning team takes their bows and makes a graceful exit. Okay, so the operation's launched. Gray shirts are mobilized. They're on their way to get out in the field and get shit done. I'm going to take another really quick tangent. For those of you who have taken the basic ICS classes, you are probably introduced to what's called the planning P. And if you look for that round top part of the P, that circular part, that's what happens every day. New information is gathered. We anticipate what's going to happen that day. Plans are made for the following day, and then it gets reviewed, et cetera, and goes around every operational period. But if you look at the stem of that P, the stem of the P is all that stuff, and the terms are different. FEMA's terms are a little different than Team Rubicon's, but all that stuff is what happened in advance. That's the ISR, the recon, the et cetera, et cetera. And all of that information continues to provide the basis for those daily decisions on what is our mission and how are we going to proceed. One more tangent, then I'll get back on track. Demobilization is really not baked in to the planning process. But because demobilization really starts that very first operational period, there is a link. If the operation is going to last for 5 days, how are you going to know on the first day the basic concept for your demobilization, for packing up, resupplying? Where do you put things back? Where do you put your toys back when you're done playing with them? Okay, all of that is going to be extracted from information in the planning process. Last but not least, we've got our after action report. Okay. There are two parts of that. One I find more fun, having been fortunate to be on a number of operations. One I find more fun than the other part. The first part, we capture knowledge, you fill out this big report, it goes to the National Operations Center, and it sits in a file for people to have and look and use it to improve Team Rubicon in general. The second part summarizes the metrics and our impact on the community. Everything from what was the financial equivalent of our efforts to how much debris did we remove. And these slides come from a couple of slides in the what we call the out brief that was given to the local government and the local emergency managers for Operation Born to Muck that was in South Jersey last June and July. So for me, this is the part that really describes our impact. This is how many hours we put in. This is how much junk we took away and all of that. Well, that's the planning process, but I promised you there'd be one more point, and that's you. Okay? So time for Neil to lecture again. I know you've heard it 1,000 times. Consider stepping into volunteer leadership. As we move into a time when the disaster season has now taken us to a point where we've seen more hurricanes than any other. Maybe we're tied, but it looks like we got more coming. More tropical storms and hurricanes than any other recorded season. We need gray shirts on the ground to help us as much as we can. If you can step into a volunteer position, if you can take additional training online related to this, there's a Recon Advon class and there's an operational planning class that the Recon Advon, I think, is 4-ish hours, and operational planning is about a half an hour, and that one's on your own. Recon Advon has an instructor. The operational planning is self-service, and both of them are pretty darn good. And be a local resource. Be available if it hits the fan. We hope we can count on you to assist.